Hey YouTube, Time itself here. It's been a couple weeks, but let's talk about the Battlefield 4 Spring patch. There have been a whole lot of changes. I'm not going to go over all of them, I'm just going to talk about the ones that I have something to say about and think are noteworthy. Personally, I'm on to Hardline for the most part, and these updates are more just for posterity. See how Battlefield 4 fares through its entire lifespan after a very rough start. Anyway, on to the patch. The very first thing I noticed, and has probably been undersold, is how much more precision is necessary to spot enemy players, especially at longer ranges. Now before it might have been a bit too generous, but they went overkill here. I want to say they just copied over the Hardline code, because Hardline does this too, but in Hardline things tend to be a bit closer together, and so you don't normally need quite the same level of precision to spot enemy players. So I can be looking at a guy and thinking I'm spotting him, and then he doesn't end up spotted, and I'm pretty sure I was close enough to have done so, and then I think, oh, it must be a friendly whose icon just isn't showing up. You might remember that bug from early in the game's life, and no, for some reason I just could not spot some guy because I wasn't precise enough. It's really frustrating. There's of course also the nuisance that you look at something and think, is that an enemy player? And then you try and spot it, and for whatever reason it doesn't end up spotted, and oh, it turns out it was an enemy player. Things like that. You look at a dead body and think, I think that's a dead body. Let me double check and by trying to spot it. No, that just doesn't work as well now. It clearly went overboard here. And so my spotting is less useful to me, but it's also less useful to my teammates, and their spotting is much less useful to me. In fact, spotting has, for the most part, been taken out of the game, I feel like. Enemy players aren't being spotted on the map nearly as often, and it's harder to tell what's going on. I expect there was some improvement to the netcode, however, if you were looking for a significant reduction in kill trades, it's not here, they still happen quite abundantly. If I'm using iron sights, it's hard to tell, but they have definitely increased the amount of tracer fire. Makes it a lot easier to get a feel for the spread of your weapon. Watching the Battlefront trailer the other day, it was clear that they'd used the reticle, was it third-person aim-down sights, that the reticle was still there to indicate spread. This does kind of the same thing, and so it's good for giving players more feedback about what their weapons are doing. Which is good, because bullets going randomly just kind of every which way is sort of confusing. As I recall, that was one of the big arguments against suppression, was suddenly I'm suppressed and my bullets don't go where my gun is pointing. And then they go and, well, it looks like they reduced the effective suppression, but they increased the importance of managing the spread due to firing your gun. There's all sorts of things I could say about this. First, they tied the rate of spread recovery to rate of fire and, I think, is basically base damage of the gun. Whereas before that had mostly just been based on the weapon category. Higher rate of fire weapons got lower spread recovery rates, and this makes sense because you don't want to let a high rate of fire weapon just burst fire really fast and get the same accuracy as a low rate of fire weapon, because then the higher rate of fire weapon just becomes flat out more versatile to a player that can control it like that. But they didn't leave room for any other factors, and so there's a very one-dimensional relationship between the rate of fire of a weapon and the range it's intended to be used at, except that consideration doesn't include recoil, first shot multiplier, recoil recovery, base spread, reload time, magazine size, all that other stuff that goes into balancing weapons. It'd be like if I balanced everything just strictly around time to kill and nothing else. You'd look at me like, well, what are you doing? I mean, in some ways that's a reasonable start, but you actually have to try things out, see how they play, and actually give some more variation there. Otherwise, it's just like you have one weapon with one variable that you can change. See, when they went through these, it's like they assumed that recoil and first shot multiplier didn't matter. Like, they listened to a whole bunch of pretty good PC players who were like, oh, I can perfectly compensate for the recoil of my weapon. Well, I can't, and most players can't. So it would be perfectly reasonable to say that this is a skill ceiling for the usage of all their weapons. While these changes might be useful in balancing the game, I'm really not sure. I'm not good enough at the game to really be able to tell, and how they affect the general population, well, time will tell. But that this is the way that this is determined, it's like they found a hammer and then every problem from there on out was a nail. This is the only way they know how to deal with this sort of thing is sort of confusing to me. I've seen several people make the comparison to Battlefront's stormtroopers with their blasters just because of the increased spread and the tracers. It's like everyone's shooting lasers that just go everywhere. And, you know, at times, I really do feel like a stormtrooper. In this case, I start firing too soon, and that's one of the reasons I have so much spread. This was just really frustrating when it happened. Before I would have screamed netcode, and well, now it's clear that just bullets go everywhere and not on the target, even though my aim is, there's nothing to complain about my aim there. But that fight's happening at less than 10 meters, I think, and I miss most of 16 shots? Really? Oh, and attachments now have downsides. It's the same thing that happened a while into Battlefield 3. They realized, oh, we want the basic gun to be a valid choice. You know, the standard barrel, no grip, that sort of thing. And I may have even commented on it when Battlefield 4 first came out that they didn't carry over the lessons that they learned in Battlefield 3. Except in Battlefield 4, it was clear that they continued with the everything has a benefit because they wanted to sell you more battle packs and encourage players to grind out all those attachments. Well, now that that's taken care of, they can go back to actually properly balancing the game. Interestingly, they said they've fixed head glitching. I think this involves moving where the bullets come from and then the camera, and it's all a little bit mysterious. My big issue is that it makes it hard to know where your hitboxes actually are. I'm hoping at this point it's mostly just getting used to them again. However, the messy part comes when it gets mixed in with the lean around cover feature. When you go up to chest high cover and crouch and then aim down sights, if you have the feature enabled, it's supposed to pull you up so you look over it. Except now your camera moves up anyway when you aim down sights because that's part of their head glitch fix. At least that's my understanding. It gets just a bit confusing. If you were wondering about any of the basic quality of life stuff, like the beginning of games starting before the maps are properly loaded, no. Death to an invisible claymore right there. You know, your sights are still not loaded in, and so iron sights are a poor way to start the game, which is exactly how they start out Gunmaster. It shows you how much they thought that went through. It's typically a free-for-all game mode, but Battlefield does it team style, even though, well, really only one person has to win in order to win the game and end it. It's weird, I don't know. It's mostly having teammates is about, you know, giving you time to switch weapons once you get your 2 kills with each of them, or, you know, give the enemy positions away. It's kind of goofy. I do not know why they added it. The changes to the SRAW, mostly just turning speed limitation, mean it's hard to use against anything that's moving quickly, and so it's just kind of a long-range sniping rocket launcher now. It's like they saw a bunch of montages and figured they'd balance around that. And like, no, those clips are montage clips for a reason. That's not normal usage of this weapon. Unlike the increased importance of spread, this change is probably going to hurt players who aren't so great with the SRAW more than it hurts the players who are really good with it. Shotguns got a little bit of love. It's like they were looking at the spread increase numbers and they came up with some hit probabilities based on spread, and they realized, oh wait, shotguns not so hot. So that they actually went in and, they increased the pellet count, decreased the damage per pellet, but in the end it does about the same amount of damage. It's going to make it more consistent in terms of how close you're aiming and how much of the enemy is visible. That's going to be much more consistent in terms of how much damage you actually do. Shotguns aren't as good as I might like to see them, but at least they're much more consistent now. The in-combat spawns are still extremely forgiving, and I feel like right before a player dies, they're no longer in combat. They can do some goofy stuff. Hey, at least the game is no longer freezing. Or at least I managed to play for, I don't know, 3-6 hours before it froze on me. That's an improvement, right? Except at this point the game went back in the box and I went back to playing Hardline.